Clara Morgan sat on the aging porch while the Wyoming sunset poured shades of honey and fire across the horizon. Behind her, nearly 200 pounds of sleek, soundless power crossed the worn wooden boards without a creak. Shadow pressed her broad head against Clara's shoulder, a low, thunderous purr resonating through both of them. At her other side, Luna remained perfectly still, his white fur glowing softly in the dimming light, dark eyes scanning the world with quiet vigilance. Shadow leaned forward and began licking Clara's cheek, gentle despite her size. Clara truly laughed for the first time in years, lifting her hands in mock defense. That sound had once vanished from this land completely. There had been a time when Clara was a widow ready to leave everything behind. Now she sat between two forms of love no one said should exist. 3 years earlier, she had found two helpless infants curled together in her barn, clinging as if separation meant death because it did. Today, they were her family, and in ways she never could have predicted, they had saved her. Stories like Shadow and Nova's remind us that the strongest connections often arise in moments of devastation. If you believe in love without boundaries, consider subscribing to Animal Rescue Tales. Every subscriber helps preserve true accounts like this, stories that redefine what family means. 3 years earlier, Clara Morgan was barely functioning. At 58, she drifted through her days numb and hollow, a stranger in her own life. Her husband, Robert, had died suddenly of a heart attack 10 months earlier, and part of her still waited for him to come home each evening. The farm they had built over 3 decades had become unbearable. Every fence line and weathered tool reminded her of what she had lost. Selling the land felt like the only way to survive. Staying meant suffocating. The papers were signed. In 3 weeks, she would leave Wyoming for Idaho, move in with her sister, and try to forget the life she had lived among the mountains. Then the storm arrived. On April 10th, emergency alerts flooded the radio warnings unlike anything Clara had heard. Meteorologists spoke of historic danger. Tornadoes in the northern Rockies were almost unheard of. She prepared out of habit, secured doors, checked water, reinforced the barn. But deep down, she no longer cared. If the storm erased everything, she would let it. The tornado touched down on April 13th, 60 miles away. From her basement, Clara watched the sky turn bruised and violent as the wind screamed like something alive. Though the funnel spared her land, its reach did not. Microbursts tore through the area. Hail fell relentlessly. Rain flooded roads. Her house remained standing barely. Nearby farms were destroyed. Livestock disappeared. Entire homes vanished. An illegal exotic animal breeding facility 60 miles away was leveled. Many animals died. A few escaped. Among them was a black panther mother who shielded her 6-week-old cub from flying debris. She didn't survive. Elsewhere, a breeding barn collapsed. A German shepherd mother died protecting her litter. Only one puppy lived, a tiny white runt shoved into a narrow gap by his dying mother. In the chaos, rescue efforts failed. Roads washed out. Shelters overflowed. Animals were moved wherever space existed. The puppy ended up in a temporary shelter near Clara's property, escaped during another storm, and disappeared. The panther cub wandered alone for days, too young to hunt, too frightened to approach people traveling nearly 40 miles on instinct. Clara knew none of this. On April 16th, she finally forced herself into the back section of the barn she had avoided since Robert's death. The door creaked exactly as it always had. For a heartbeat, she expected to hear him inside. Instead, she heard something else. A weak cry. Then another. In the farthest corner, wrapped in old blankets Robert had stored years earlier, were 2 tiny bodies curled tightly together. One was a white puppy, shaking with cold and hunger. The other stole the breath from her lungs. Black fur, enormous paws, pale blue eyes far too alert. A panther cub, in her barn, in Wyoming, holding the puppy close. Fear told her to back away, to call for help, to leave. But when she knelt, both babies pressed closer together, terrified yet pleading. Clara sank into the straw and wept for the animals, for Robert, for herself, for the life she had nearly abandoned. In their fragile dependence, she saw her own grief mirrored. She lifted them carefully, refusing to separate them, and carried them into the house. There was no plan, no thought of legality, only certainty. They slept curled together on the kitchen floor, breathing in unison. Clara watched them, then picked up her phone and canceled the farm sale. Whatever this was, she wasn't walking away. That night, she called the local veterinarian. Dr. Margaret Grayson arrived within half an hour. When she saw the pair entwined, even her professional composure faltered. "Good God," she whispered. "That's a black panther." "I know," Clara said quietly. And that was only the beginning. Dr. Grayson examined them carefully, movement slow and deliberate. "That cub likely escaped the exotic facility destroyed in the storm," she said. "Authorities are still searching." "They survived together," Clara replied firmly. "Because they stayed together." The exam revealed the puppy was barely 2 weeks old, severely underweight and hypothermic. The cub was around 6 weeks, thin and scraped from days of travel. "They shouldn't be alive," Dr. Grayson murmured. "But somehow, they are." She prepared special formula and taught Clara how to feed them. The puppy latched desperately. The cub hesitated, growling softly until Clara spoke to him in quiet reassurances. Slowly, he drank. When feeding ended, both babies crawled back together instantly. The cub wrapped his legs around the puppy and began to vibrate with a low sound. Clara froze. "Is something wrong?" Dr. Grayson smiled softly. "No, he's purring." She stayed for hours, teaching Clara everything she could. But before leaving, her voice hardened. "You must call Fish and Wildlife tomorrow," she said. "Keeping a wild cub is illegal." "I understand," Clara replied, without promising anything. That night, Clara built a nest by the fire. The babies curled together immediately. Clara sat nearby, intending to watch for an hour. She didn't sleep at all. As dawn approached, clarity settled over her. Robert's death had hollowed her life. But now 2 lives depended on her. If she let go, the puppy would be alone. The cub would lose everything that made him whole. Or she could fight for them, for their bond, for the family they had chosen. The choice was reckless, and absolutely right. When morning came, the puppy searched blindly until the cub answered with a soft sound. Only then did he relax. Clara fed them both, smiling as the cub drank confidently and the puppy's tail twitched with effort. And just like that, everything changed. Clara carried the 2 small bodies onto the porch, letting warmth and daylight push away the lingering smell of fear. The cub stared out at the mountains, eyes round and unblinking. The puppy lifted his nose to the breeze, ears flicking at birdsong and unfamiliar scents. "You need names," Clara murmured. "You're not alone anymore." She touched the cub gently. "Shadow," she decided. "Dark, powerful, something you can't ignore." Then she smiled at the puppy. "Nova," the moon beside his night. Night and moon. 2 lives pulled from disaster. 1 unbreakable connection. For the first time since Robert's death, the farm no longer felt like a place she needed to flee. It felt like a beginning. A week later, a knock broke the quiet. Joseph Maverick from Wyoming Fish, Wildlife, and Park stood at the edge of her driveway, calm, cautious, unreadable. Clara met him with her heart racing. Inside, Shadow and Nova slept wrapped tightly together. Maverick stopped short when he saw them. "How long have they been here?" he asked softly. "Since the day I found them." He knelt, observed, made notes, said nothing. After a while, he rose. "The regulations are clear," he said. "That cub should be placed in an approved facility." "You'd separate them?" Clara asked. "That's standard procedure." "No," she said firmly. "Please watch them first." Reluctantly, he stayed. Nova whimpered in his sleep. Shadow woke immediately, nudged him closer, and licked his face. Nova settled. Shadow's purr filled the room. Maverick turned toward the window. "I've done this work for 20 years, he said slowly. "I've never seen a wild animal treat another species as family." "So what happens now?" Clara whispered. "I'll recommend a special permit," he replied. "Strict conditions, constant inspections. 1 mistake, and they're removed." "I'll do whatever it takes," Clara said. "Anything." 4 weeks later, the permit arrived, pages of rules, inspections, fencing standards, and documentation. It was daunting. Clara didn't hesitate. She wasn't running anymore. She was home. Keeping the permit required more than promises. Clara enrolled in accredited courses on exotic animal care, proved long-term financial planning, and prepared emergency protocols for fires, escapes, medical crises, and severe weather. She met every requirement. Savings meant for retirement disappeared into fencing, permits, equipment, and training. Neighbors who were once terrified slowly softened as they watched her discipline in the animal's behavior. Many nights, Clara studied until exhaustion, learning anatomy, nutrition, behavioral signals, and warning signs. Her entire life narrowed to one purpose, never separating Shadow and Nova. And the months passed. By 3 months, Shadow weighed nearly 30 pounds. His once pale eyes had deepened into a vivid green. His movements grew deliberate and controlled. He stalked toys with precision, wrestled Nova while keeping his claws carefully sheathed, and developed a purr that vibrated through the house. Nova, the same age, was 25 pounds of white fur and boundless energy. His bark deepened, his awareness sharpened, yet he remained endlessly patient with Shadow, allowing rough play he would tolerate from no one else. They slept together every night. As they outgrew each bed, Clara built larger ones, eventually surrendering an entire corner of the living room to them. Every morning, without exception, she found them exactly as she had that first day. Shadow curved protectively around Nova, Nova's head resting on Shadow's paws, their breathing perfectly matched. The first true test came when Shadow reached 6 months and nearly 60 pounds. Though Clara had installed a reinforced enclosure that met every regulation, Shadow and Nova had grown up with supervised freedom. Constant confinement felt wrong. One October afternoon, while Clara repaired fencing, a young deer stepped from the trees, drawn by grain. Everything changed instantly. Shadow froze. His posture shifted, ears flattened, eyes locked. Clara's blood turned cold. This wasn't play, it was instinct, ancient and absolute. Shadow dropped into a hunter's crouch, muscles coiling, tail still. Clara recognized the stance from hours of study. This was the moment before a kill. The deer sensed danger, but hesitated. Shadow advanced, silent and focused. Logic didn't matter. Instinct never calculates odds. Clara couldn't move. This was the moment everyone had warned her about. Then Nova barked. One sharp, commanding sound. Shadow stopped mid-step, paw lifted. He turned toward Nova, conflict blazing across his young face, instinct colliding with trust. Nova barked again, softer, and stepped between Shadow and the deer. He didn't challenge or growl. He whimpered low, steady, unwavering. No. Slowly, Shadow relaxed. He glanced once more at the deer, longing clear in his eyes, then turned away. He pressed his forehead against Nova's shoulder, a clear sign of trust. The deer fled. Moments later, Shadow rolled onto his back, exposing his belly. Nova leapt on him, and they wrestled like cubs again. Clara dropped to her knees, shaking. That night, she called Dr. Grayson. "What you described contradicts everything we teach," the vet said after a long silence. "A panther suppressing prey drive for another species shouldn't happen." Then, she added quietly, "But I've watched them, documented months of behavior. I don't know where the limits are anymore. They're changing what we think is possible." By their first birthday, Shadow weighed 85 pounds. Nova was nearly 50. They were powerful, dangerous, if misunderstood, but gentle with each other. They groomed one another, communicated through subtle gestures, shared looks, and signals Clara could only partially understand. Maverick's monthly inspections always ended the same way: hesitant approval. They weren't merely surviving. They were flourishing. Eventually, a reporter arrived. The article ran under the headline, "Love That Defies Nature." Letters followed messages from people told their families were wrong, unnatural, impossible. Shadow and Nova gave them hope. The farm became something new, not officially a sanctuary, but a place where unlikely truths unfolded daily, where grief transformed into purpose, where rules bent beneath undeniable evidence. When winter arrived, Clara watched black and white figures race through snowdrifts and finally understood what Robert had meant when he said the best things in life come without warning. They hadn't only chosen each other, they had chosen her. When the second spring brought storm warnings again, Clara prepared, carefully monitoring radar, reviewing emergency plans, checking reinforcements. Fear felt different now. Shadow was nearly 90 pounds. Nova was 50 pounds of steady resolve. When the storm hit, Shadow refused to go inside. Nova stayed with him. Clara tried to lead them in. They wouldn't move. So she sat between them. Rain lashed down. Wind roared. Lightning split the sky. Clara wrapped her arms around both, heart racing. Then she realized something astonishing. They weren't just enduring the storm. They were protecting her. Shadow blocked the wind to her left. Nova braced her right. Together, they formed a living shield. "You incredible, impossible boys," Clara whispered through tears. She finally understood protection went both ways in this family. They held their ground together. That was what family meant. All three of them. The sound came without warning, a sharp crack, splitting the air. Clara looked up just in time to see the massive oak at the edge of the property finally give way. A century-old giant, weakened by earlier storms, began to fall. Time slowed. The trunk tilted, unstoppable, crashing toward the house with devastating force. Clara never had time to scream. Shadow and Nova moved as one. Shadow struck her from the left, Nova from the right. 90 pounds and 50 pounds combined into a single force, launching Clara backward. She hit the porch hard, breath knocked from her lungs. Shadow shielded her body. Nova pressed close. The tree slammed into the porch where she'd been sitting moments earlier. Wood shattered. Debris flew. The sound was final and overwhelming. Then silence. Rain fell. Clara gasped for air. Beneath the chaos, she felt it, two hearts pounding against hers. Fast, strong, alive. Shadow lifted his head, green eyes locked on her face. Nova did the same. There was no doubt. They had saved her life. Clara wrapped her arms around them and sobbed into their soaked fur, whispering thanks again and again. When the storm passed, neighbors arrived after hearing Nova's frantic barking. They found Clara shaken but unharmed, sitting amid wreckage with a panther and a dog pressed against her like living shields. The story spread. This time, it went nationwide. News segments aired. Articles ran. A video went viral, Shadow and Nova sitting side by side. The panther's tail draped protectively around the dog. Letters poured in. Then another message arrived. A prestigious university offered funding, facilities, and international recognition. Researchers wanted to study Shadow and Nova. They promised care, resources, and groundbreaking work. They would stay together, but they would no longer be hers. They would become subjects. Clara read the letter over and over on her rebuilt porch. Money was tight. The costs were crushing. Then she looked up. Shadow and Nova lay nearby, exactly as they always did, black and white entwined, sunlight glinting off their fur. Shadow groomed Nova carefully. Nova slept in complete trust. They looked just as they had 2 years earlier, two babies clinging together because separation meant death. Clara went inside, picked up a pen, and wrote 2 words across the letter. No, thank you. They weren't research. They were family. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching. When Maverick arrived the following week, he found Clara expanding the enclosure. "You'll run out of money someday," he said quietly. "The university would have solved that." "The university would have taken my family," Clara replied. "That's not a problem I need fixed." Maverick was silent for a long moment. "I was wrong about you," he said at last. "And I think they were exactly what you needed." Word spread. Donations followed, small amounts from strangers who believed in the bond. An online fundraiser appeared with a simple message: keep family together. Within weeks, it covered a full year of care. By the time Shadow and Nova turned 2, the farm had changed. Clara registered it as a wildlife education center. Visitors came to learn not just about animals, but about healing, trauma, and unexpected families. They watched Shadow respond to Nova's commands. They saw Nova trust Shadow without hesitation. And they always left after seeing the same sight: Shadow curled around Nova, both asleep as they had been from the beginning. On the 3rd anniversary of the day she found them, Clara sat on the porch at sunset. Shadow was fully grown now, powerful and magnificent. Nova stood solid and watchful beside her. Clara thought of Robert. How he would have loved this story. She smiled. Once, she believed grief meant the end of everything. Shadow and Nova had taught her otherwise, that endings could become beginnings, that family was chosen, not assigned, and that love didn't need permission. Shadow purred. Nova leaned into her. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Tonight brought peace. As the sun sank behind the mountains, Clara Morgan knew she was exactly where she belonged, home, with the family that wasn't supposed to exist, but did. A family that proved, every day, that sometimes impossible is just another word for miracle.